What's up, guys? This is Kephas.
Welcome to SBA Spotlight. In these videos, I'll be covering how well the single button assistant performs for each spec, what it does well, where it falls short, and how to get the most out of it, especially if you're looking for a lower stress or more accessible way to play. So whether you're here to relax, overcome a limitation, or just see how far one button can take you, I've got you covered. Alright, so let's talk about Windwalker monks and how they perform with the single button assistant. This is going to be an interesting one because your view of how well this tool works with Windwalker monks is going to be very dependent on how effective you are at playing a Windwalker monk without it. According to Wowhead, you're going to lose about 26% of your optimal DPS potential on a target dummy if you are using the single button assistant. That sounds like a lot, and if you are a skilled Windwalker monk, it certainly will be. But for most people, it's not nearly as bad as it sounds. And this is because Windwalker monk is regarded as one of the more difficult classes to play in the game. This is a fast-paced class with a lot of procs to manage and multiple resources. And when you consider everything that the single button assistant is able to manage for Windwalker monks, you might find the trade-off worthwhile. Windwalker monks have a lot of damage abilities at their disposal, and the single button assistant will use almost every single one of them. So it's going to manage generating chi with Tiger Palm, and it's going to spend that chi on every single ability that uses chi. It'll even switch to spinning crane kick when you're fighting multi-targets, and it will also use it whenever you have Dance of Chi-Ji procs, and the same goes for Blackout Kick. It'll even use Crackling Jade Lightning whenever you're at max stacks if you've chosen the appropriate talents. Speaking of talents, you have a lot of optional abilities tucked in them, and it will use almost all of them. Obviously, your core abilities are covered like Fists of Fury and Rising Sun Kick, but it will also use Strike of the Windlord, Jadefire Stomp, Whirling Dragon Punch, and even Celestial Conduit if you've chosen that hero path. Surprisingly, it does use Storm, Earth, and Fire, but it doesn't really manage it very well, especially if you're trying to attack multiple targets. But it does not use Invoke Zuin the White Tiger. If you play an Enhancement Shaman, it's the exact opposite. The SBA will use Feral Spirits, but it will not use Ascendance. I think the criteria for what makes the cut and what doesn't is cooldown duration. Both Ascendance and Zuin are 2 minutes long, where Storm, Earth, and Fire and Feral Spirits are 1.5 minutes. Either way, unfortunately, the single button assistant will not summon Zuin, so that's something that we're going to have to take a look at. It also doesn't use Slicing Winds, which replaces Flying Serpent Kick, another ability that isn't used. And this isn't a surprise, the single button assistant tends to avoid any abilities that move your character. With Slicing Winds, the longer you hold down the button, the further you will lunge forward. So this is always going to be an ability that you're going to have to manage on a separate button if you choose to take it as a talent. Invoke Zuin, though, is a talent that you're pretty much always going to want to take. So the easiest way to manage it is obviously by just putting it on a separate button and using it whenever it's available. Unfortunately, Invoke Zuin is not off the global cooldown, so you can't macro it along with the single button assistant in a default macro like you could with Use Trinkets or Racials. But you still might want to consider making a default macro with the single button assistant anyway, not only to include those trinkets or racials if you have them, but also to include a no channeling conditional, because both Fists of Fury and Celestial Conduit are channeled abilities. Which means that if you're spamming the single button assistant, you will absolutely interrupt those abilities, and no channeling will prevent this. I'll have a macro in the description that will use the single button assistant with this conditional to prevent you from interrupting your channel abilities, and it will also use any unused trinkets that you have. Now, there is one final option for using Invoke Zuin if you're dead set on using just one button. If you're familiar with the GSE add-on, then you can use that to create a macro to cycle between Invoke Zuin and the single button assistant. It's a really easy macro to make, and you can find it in the description. You can import it into GSC and then hotkey it, and it will cycle between these two abilities. This way you can still spam one button and use both the single button assistant and invoke Zooin. Now, it may take a few cycles for the sequence to actually use invoke Zooin just due to how Gnome Sequencer works, but it should use it fairly quickly and continue to use it as it becomes available again. Speaking of GSE, if you're familiar with the macro that I made for Windwalker before the single button assistant and you're wondering how the two compare, this is probably no surprise because I've said it in every video I've made so far, but the Windwalker Monk single button assistant absolutely destroys my macro. It was a very hard macro to make, and I did the best I could. I've always tried to make the most accessible macro that I can, essentially trying to do what the single button assistant does, and the single button assistant just does everything better. Even with a cooldown penalty, the way it manages everything, handling your procs, managing your chi, it just does such a better job while also doing considerably more damage. And you don't even have to use modifiers to make it work. So once again, at least when it comes to my macro, the single button assistant wins hands down. Overall, there is a considerable performance drop with the single button assistant when it comes to Windwalker Monk, especially if you are a skilled player and you know how to play the class. But honestly, I think for the average player, when you consider how much this manages, you will probably see a performance increase if you use the single button assistant. Having said that, there is room for a lot more damage outside of the single button assistant, and so if you want to improve your skills and reach those levels of damage, obviously you want to avoid using the single button assistant. But of course, if you're looking for accessibility or simplification, then the single button assistant is incredibly user-friendly. You'll still have to use invoke Zooin separately, and I hope that I've helped provide some useful options for you, but when you consider everything else that the single button assistant is able to manage, I think it's a testament to how powerful this tool actually is. But that's what I've learned so far, and as always, I'd love to hear from you. What do you think of the single button assistant, and how is it working out with Windwalker Monks so far? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and with all that being said, I will see you guys on the next one.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, let me know by clicking that like button. And feel free to share it with your friends so they can enjoy it as well. And if you'd like to see more videos, you can subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon to be notified as soon as new videos are posted. You can also follow me on Facebook, and if you'd like, you can support my work on Patreon. Links to all that stuff can be found in the description below. This is Kephas. Until next time.